Stop the world!
Welcome back to Stop the World, the ASPI podcast. I'm Olivia Nelson.
And I'm David Rowe. Today we've got another episode from the sidelines of the Sydney Dialogue, which we call the Summit Sessions series.
That's right, Dave. This week's episode features Japanese politician Arfiya Eri and ASPI Analyst Daria Impiombato.
Now, Arfiya is a Japanese woman of Uyghur and Uzbek heritage. She talks about her experiences in Japanese politics, her experiences online, and also the importance of diversity in politics.
It's a fascinating conversation that covers Japan's place in the world, as well as identity, diversity, and national security. And to our listeners, please note that if you want to see Arfiya and Daria as well as hear them, head over to ASPI's YouTube channel. And with that, over to Daria and Arfiya.
Thank you so much, Arfiya, for being with us today and joining us both at the Sydney Dialogue and on our podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
I feel like we could just spend hours and hours talking about all your incredible experience. So I'm just going to have to be a little bit selective here with our topics. I'm going to start with what you just talked about on the stage here at the Sydney Dialogue. About your experience as a young woman in politics, also a young woman from a diverse background in Japan, and what your experience has been like both online and offline.
Sure. Wow. Where to start? So currently I am the youngest female parliamentarian in Japan at age 35. I always argue that, you can run for the lower house at age 25 in Japan. And so I argue that the fact that I'm 35 and I'm still the youngest is in and of itself a problem. I always, think that we should have much younger politicians, much more representational, diverse voices, especially voices of the youth. Currently, 10% of the lower house where I am is women. In the upper house, 25% is women. In the lower house, that proportionate number has not changed in decades. So we talk about gender parity all the time, but when we think about representation and whether our democracy is truly representative of our people, we still have a lot of work to do. At the same time, one of the, I think, more pleasant surprises for me has been that because I represent a constituency, regardless of my age or my gender, I am able to put forward arguments and issues and solutions in place that benefit my constituents. And I've experienced in Japanese politics that, there really isn't a barrier, held against me in doing my job just because I am, young or I am a woman. I think it's a very inclusive, as long as you make it in, it's a very inclusive environment that I get to work in, and I'm very proud of that and appreciative of that.
And so what about your experience in the online space? We know that even, here in Australia, women politicians still face a pretty harsh environment online.
Yeah.
What was your experience like that?
Mine was very harsh as well. I ran twice, and in both of my campaigns, I experienced just viral levels of hate speech, disinformation, and misinformation. To this day, I am prone to hate and disinformation every day. And no matter what I do in Parliament, whether it's a public hearing or parliamentary speech, or, I post something on Twitter, on X, I am often sort of prone to that turning into some form of disinformation. So people will cut out videos of me doing a hearing and take it out of context and sort of, post that I had argued A when I was actually arguing B. So I'm constantly having to sort of correct disinformation online, and it takes away a lot of time and effort from what I could actually be doing, representing my constituency and doing the job that I need to do.
It must be an emotional toll as well.
Yeah. I mean, you get used to it, but you shouldn't, There is, I think, a sense of emotional labor, of course, that comes with it, and energy that, that's taken away. And I'd much rather put all of that energy and all of those emotions into doing my job well, which is representing my people. So in that sense, I'm very frustrated that, it's just that I'm not able to be committing more to do my job. Yeah.
Yes, I think it's been sort of a trending line in conversations here at the Sydney Dialogue as well, and like, you know, what governments can do to support people and empower people like you, because it's the fundamental of our democratic systems. If people like you eventually give up because it's so strenuous and it has such a big toll on your personal life as well, which you shouldn't have to experience, we just end up with less representation because people end up dropping out of campaigns or just having enough of it. And that would be a shame if that's the case, because I think we need more people like you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. But I do agree, and I am concerned. One of my biggest concerns is, you know, when people see hate or disinformation against candidates like myself, it's not really just about me, you know. I think there are many Japanese people, including people who voted for me, who feel represented by me. Or who feel related to me in some ways. And I'm always concerned of, well, what will they think when they see the way I've been treated? How will they understand what their place might be in our society? And the last thing I want is for young kids growing up, little girls, little boys, kids of mixed heritage, to get the message somehow that they don't belong in our country. Or that they're not able to, you know, dream of doing whatever it is that they please. So one of the things I focus on is to make sure that the message I'm sending to our young boys and girls is that, you know, they do belong no matter what they look like, who they are, what they dream of, that they have a place in my cities, and that they have a place to dream of whatever it is that they want to do.
That's really, really well said, and I hope that you continue to fight along those lines. I want to just stick a little bit longer around Japan and sort of, you know, the domestic situation in Japan. When we spoke earlier, you said, you know, that Japan's representation overseas is not always actually representative of what Japan truly looks like. And you also said on your panel earlier that, you know, you talked about Japan's place in the world that is being somewhat misrepresented in the past few years, and you called for, you know, our democratic societies to rise up to face all of these challenges that we've been talking about. Would you like to expand on that a bit more?
Yeah. I think there's two aspects of it. One is an aspect of diversity, inclusion, and representation. And I think it's an issue all of our democracies are grappling with right now. However, I think as a Japanese MP, one of the frustrations and regrets I have always is that Japan, for being such an inclusive and accepting country, somehow, you know, hasn't been doing a good job of presenting itself to the world as such. So whenever I'm abroad at these events, you know, existence of MPs like myself are always caught by surprise by our friends and partners. Because the image that we're presenting, I think, is still that, you know, we are not as diverse, not as inclusive, overrepresented by men. That's just not true. That's not the truth I've lived in. That hasn't been my lived experience. And so one of the things I really hope to do within my job too is to really showcase through my own election and my own campaigning representation of different kinds of Japanese people. And that could be gender, that could be age, that could be ethnic background, but also, you know, where you were raised, how you were raised, what economic background you come from, what family background you come from. And we have a lot to do in our political space in increasing representation in that regard. And I find representation to be so important, not only for Japan, but in all of our democracies, as we continue our discussion on tech, AI, new developments, climate change. All of these issues must go hand in hand with representation of various stakeholders and users of new services, as well as people who will be affected by the policies that we're making. So I think we really need to be working on diversity and inclusion as partners and in every area, every facets of policymaking that we talk about. Another is actual evident threats to democracy we see. We live in the context of shrinking space for civil rights, human rights, democracy worldwide, rise of authoritarianism, rise of populism, extremism, not least due to social media as well, and how countries with shared values of democracy and freedom and human rights, how we stand up to this during this time will shape how we will deal with threats to democracy going forward. I think we need to be seeing much stronger alliances on national security and multilateral initiatives with like-minded countries on human rights and making sure that our rights are protected, not only in our countries, but all over the world.
That's great to hear from the perspective of a human rights researcher like myself.
That's right.
It can be a little frustrating when you're on the side of the evidence-based research to inform policy, and then you talk to policymakers, and they hear you, but they always get back with some general answers of our hands are tied, or there's not really much that we can do about this when it's happening somewhere else in the world, or it doesn't look or sound so related to our democratic resilience at home. But for us who've been looking at these issues for so long, and you were during years and years working at the UN, you know that they're all interrelated and they have repercussions for our own citizens at home. And I think we should also care about what happens to people everywhere in the world if we can. It's we are strong. Both Japan and Australia, they're strong both economically and democratically. So we should definitely try to do more on that. And I'm glad you brought it back to human rights, because I wanted to move a bit onto our next topic, which is the human rights crisis in the Uyghur region. Mm-hmm. You are, a huge spokesperson, for the Uyghur people everywhere in the world for their protection. I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about what you've been doing in Japan to try and change our own policies to be more effective, to improve the situation of Uyghurs, not only in the Uyghur region, but also in our own countries.
Yeah, absolutely. I am part of a bipartisan committee on human rights, a bipartisan parliamentary union on human rights, where we discuss, different MPs come together and discuss how Japan can approach global human rights issues better. And one of the major topics we talk about is the Uyghur issue, and especially the supply chain issue. It's very unfortunate to say, but I think the rest of the world is leading in terms of putting guardrails in place to make sure that we're not importing goods tainted by forced labor, especially Uyghur forced labor from China. Japan hasn't been able to put in regulations in place for that. The US has, the EU has, a number of other partner countries have. And so we're working really hard to make sure that we have some sort of a guideline or a regulation in place, and in place fast. I don't think many Japanese people know, actually, that the goods they're buying on the day-to-day that are made in China could be tainted by forced labor or human rights abuses. They are aware of human rights issues, but I don't think we're aware as individual Japanese people how much this human rights abuse has infiltrated our lives. And I truly, truly believe that if Japanese people had a choice of that was honestly presented to them, as to, okay, here's a cheaper good that's been made of forced labor, and here's a little more expensive good that has not been made of forced labor. I completely believe that Japanese people will pay more to buy goods that are from clean supply chains. It's just that right now, as consumers, we don't even have the knowledge or the right to know where our goods are coming from, how they're being made. And so a little bit of transparency and guardrails on that, I think, would be supported by our people. So that's one of the things I'm working on. Another within our parliamentary union that we've been working on for a long time is making sure that we constantly are providing platforms to individuals coming from places with human rights abuses to come speak to us at Parliament, members of parliament and make their arguments, whether that be folks from Southern Mongolia or Tibet, Hong Kong, or Uyghurs. And I'm very proud that many Japanese MPs are incredibly open to meeting these victims as well as advocates in hearing what they have to say, and also providing a safe space for them to advocate for their rights in Japan. We also look at actually Ukraine and Gaza as well, and overall how our humanitarian aid funding, especially to Gaza, for example, has been effective or not been effective. We've argued in the case of Gaza that Japan was one of the first countries to provide humanitarian aid and financial aid to Gaza, but we haven't been doing a good job of making sure that the aid that's been sent is actually delivered to the people that need to receive that aid. And so we've been arguing as a parliamentary union that the government needs to do more, that we need to be, we can't just stop our aid or our contribution to this humanitarian crisis at funding. We can't just throw away funding. Those are taxes, right? Those are our taxpayer money. The sense that I get from my constituents is that they're very happy for our taxpayer money to be spent on humanitarian aid all over the world. I don't hear a single person complaining about that. But what they get concerned about when I tell them this is that, we're just committing to funding, but not really checking where those funds are going or whether aid that we wanted to provide has been reached to people who need to get that aid. And so we try to make arguments to make sure that the Japanese government is holding different stakeholders accountable to make sure that aid that we commit to is going to the right places.
And that's such important work. I think it can feel really frustrating for people on such issues like Gaza or the Uyghur crisis, where these issues are very polarizing, I feel, and that it's not good for our communities when our governments seem to be so powerless or not willing really to take action. Mm-hmm. So it's great to hear that you're doing something towards that when we're looking at ongoing genocides and we're still just so not capable to put in place those international mechanisms that we're part of to make a difference in those situations. In terms of sort of going back to the Uyghur community and the Uyghur diaspora, I think there's I told you before, but I've met so many Uyghur people all over the world, and they're so active in the community, and it's such a sort of thriving activist space as well, which is really good to see. But unfortunately, our democracies are not very good at protecting activists or civil society groups in our own countries against for example, transnational repression. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the times the Chinese government has even been able to forcibly repatriate people back to China to detain them. So what do you think government should be doing about that?
About transnational repression. That's such an important topic that you raise. And frankly, in Japan, I don't think we're doing enough. And I don't think we're aware enough of how far this transnational repression extends and how much restriction this sort of gives to Uyghur people living outside of China, or other people, other vulnerable populations living outside of China. One of the things I've advocated for is to make sure that all people in Japan, regardless of whether they're nationals or not, if we are a democratic country, every single person who steps into our country, who steps foot in our country, should feel free, should feel safe, should feel protected when they are with us. And one of the things I'm very proud of as a Japanese national of Uyghur descent is that prior to 2016, I was able to go back and forth between China and Japan. And every time I set foot in China, I would feel scared. I always knew that even if I was a Japanese national, I look Uyghur, I am Uyghur. And there was always a sense of fear of, I am safe today, but I might not be tomorrow. Or that based on what I look like, what I sound like, or what my heritage is, anybody could do anything to me at any point, and I probably would not be protected. And every time I went back to Japan, there would be this sense of safety and security. And on our passports, they stamp returned home. And that to me and my parents always gives a sense of, oh, we are home, we're safe here. No one's out to get us just because we look the way we look. That is the sense that I want every single person in Japan to feel. And that's something that I think we have the responsibility to provide.
Well, I think that's an amazing note to end with, unless you would like to share some final thoughts with us.
No, I'm just really grateful for this opportunity, and I'm grateful for your work. And I mentioned during the public session of the speech as well, but I am so grateful for ASPI's work on providing factual evidence to atrocities that are ongoing. That gives lawmakers and other stakeholders reason to do more. And that gives others, less of an excuse to do less. And so thank you for your work, and I'm so honored and grateful to be here.
No, thank you. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
That's all we have time for today, folks, on Stop the World. Thanks for listening.
To find out more about the Sydney Dialogue or watch sessions on demand, visit tsd.aspi.org.au. We'll be back with another episode next week.